Hello, welcome to Jason the Old Millennial. My name is Jason, speaking to you here in my basement in the great state of Kansas. Today's video, we're going to do a deep dive on The Who. No, that's not a question. That's the name of the band, The Who. Yes, The Who, which provides one of the great comedy bits of and confusion when you name the band and go, who? No, The Who, as I did before there. The Who is one of the great British rock bands coming into the 1960s, really comes into their own late 60s into the 70s, and really just groundbreaking for so many different reasons. Really one of my favorite rock bands of all time. And I did a poll recently and this won the poll, so let's get into it. The Who. Hello everybody, hope everybody's doing well here on a Wednesday afternoon. But yeah, get to do another deep dive as I've done about 12 of these so far. I think it's maybe number 13 or so. I love doing a lot of research on these different bands and artists and doing these videos and giving my own opinions on it. And this is definitely one of those I've been really wanting to do for a while. Glad that it's won the poll, I guess, and I got to do one of my favorite bands. The Who is a band I've been a fan of since I was a teenager, probably. I remember first hearing about them through the song "It Won't Get Fooled Again." It reached on some kind of VH1 like greatest rock song poll or something, and it was on that list. And I didn't know what that song was or the Who were. And my dad kind of had explained to me who the Who were, and kind of gave me a little bit of rundown and kind of mentioned Tommy is a big album and Who's Next was a big album and all this stuff. And so it was at that point that I was like, oh, I want to get them to know the Who more. And the first album I actually heard was Tommy. My dad had a Tommy CD. And of course, it was an interesting introduction. It's not an album I would say you should be your first album, because it's definitely an out there album, and it's a rock opera concept album, which I didn't know what rock operas were, but it was a cool introduction to rock operas and into the band The Who. And then the second CD he had was Who's Next, which is definitely one that I was like, wow, this is such an amazing album. Made me very interested in the group. My dad also had a greatest hits CD, and so I poured over those 3 CDs as a teenager and just absolutely loved The Who for those 3. I didn't really expand my knowledge of them until recently. Like I said, when I did this video and did the research for it, and also I'm in a group with some other guys that are big Who fans, especially Nick from Townsend 505. He's the biggest Who fan I've ever met, and he talks about them all the time. And him and Scott from Scott's Scrapbook Records, and also Brian from Brian's Music Showcase. I think they did a ranking of Who songs, and they talked about, anyways, and we talked a lot about their albums, and I think we ranked their albums already, and we're gonna do it again, probably again. Definitely one of the bands we talk about the most as a group is The Who, so I've definitely become even a bigger fan as of recently. So it's definitely one of those bands that I already knew a fair amount, because I've read Pete Townshend's autobiography, Who Am I think it's called. Very weird biography. I think Pete Townshend's kind of a weird guy. I've also seen a couple documentaries on the group just for fun. So yeah, definitely one of those groups I knew quite a bit about already, and just going through the research for this deep dive, was a lot of fun. And I've gone through all their records. I got quite a bit of them actually. They all actually were given to me by my friend Scott from Sound Lab Studios / also Scott's Scrap Dog Records. Anyways, so all my records I got from The Who are from him, actually, that he was nice enough to buy me. And I still got some more that I need to get it myself. Anyways, but yeah, so saying that, let's get down to who are The Who and how did they get started? Well, they basically got started in London in 1964. Obviously, 64 is a time when the British invasion starts with the Beatles and all that. So they're starting right in a good time with when they, at that point anyways. But of course, it goes back further than that. But If you know, it's the core four members of the group that we know the Who from. Roger Daughtry is the lead singer of the band. We got Pete Townsend on lead guitar, John Entwistle on bass, and Keith Moon on drums. And that would be the basic group. And then a couple of members have died, and they really didn't replace them. They replaced them with somebody, but I don't think they ever really were official Who members. That is the Who. Those four members that makes the band. Anyways, really, it comes from Townsend and Entwistle formed a jazz group when they were in like high school or whatever they call them in England, secondary school. And that's kind of, they met in school. They formed a jazz group, funny enough. And Entwistle played the trumpet in that. So he first started as a trumpet player, but eventually decided that it'd be better to go to the bass. Anyway, so he switched to the bass soon after that in the jazz group. So it's Pete Townsend and John Entwistle kind of started that. Also at the school that they went to, they had Roger Daughtry. And Roger Daughtry wanted to start a band. Anyways, and he, I think first became friends with Entwistle from what I remember from the biography I read on Townsend. And eventually, of course, added Townsend to the band as well. Anyways, so they called themselves the Detours. And this band, the Detours, started in 1959. Around the same time, the Beatles were starting too. Actually, the Beatles were really that early before Ringo joined the Beatles. Kind of the early Beatles was around 1959. So it kind of started at the same time as the Beatles, really. So the first lineup, this is kind of one of the most interesting parts, I think, of their story, is that Daughtry started as a lead guitar player, which is like, wow, I didn't even know he played guitar. You know, you never see videos of him playing guitar. He's always out there as the front man. But yeah, he started out as a lead guitar player. Townsend was the rhythm guitar player. There's a guy named Harry Wilson who played the drums. A guy named Colin Dawson, who was their lead singer, their front man. And of course, Entwistle was playing bass. And it's interesting about Entwistle, like he could have probably I feel like he could have been a great guitar player if he wanted to play guitar, but it seemed like a guy that, he went to the bass and he kind of decided that he was going to revolutionize the way we play the bass. And I remember seeing a documentary, Townsend talks about how, because his playing style just seems very unique, because he's very fast with his fingers. He's do, and Townsend, I remember, said, well, he played the trumpet, so he was used to moving his fingers very fast on the trumpet. It felt like he just took the bass and did the same thing, the same kind of finger movements. That's what Townsend said anyways. And definitely made the bass almost like the lead instrument at times, which is so very interesting. Because at that time, the bass wasn't that big of a deal, just there to keep the beat. Wasn't really a lead instrument until I think Entwistle really took it over. Anyways, Wilson, who was the drummer, he got fired in 1962, so they're 3 years into their rock group, the Detours, and he was replaced by another drummer named Doug Sandham. Yeah, so we still haven't gotten to Keith Moon yet. They're on their second drummer, Doug Sandham. The lead singer, Dawson, he did not get along with Roger Daughtry very well. A lot of infighting, and he eventually just quit the group, which just happens quite a bit in the group, especially with Roger Daughtry. I feel like Roger Daughtry was a bit of a jerk early on. In Pete Townsend's book, he kind of describes him being, because I think he was older. I think he was older than the other members of the group. And so he was kind of the popular guy in school, the way Pete Townsend described him in his book. So I feel like he was a bit of a, egocentric, kind of bully in some senses. And so he fought a lot with other members of the band. I mean, eventually they did get along. And if you see him now in interviews, he seems like a fine person, It doesn't seem like any problems with him. But, when you're young, it's different. But anyway, so Dawson left. Daughtry decided to take over the lead singing and give the lead guitar to Townsend. So at this point in 62, Townsend's taken over as lead guitar player. Daughtry's taken over lead singer. So we're starting to get a little more of what we know as the Who, starting to form a little bit more at this point. As three of the core members are now kind of intact in their instruments and in the way they're going to do everything. At that time, Townsend's mother helped the band get a management contract with a local producer named Robert Druce. They changed their name to The Who because their original band name, The Detours, was similar to another band. So there's some confusion because the band names were too similar. So that's why they changed it to The Who. I'm not sure who. I didn't see in the research why they were called the who came up with that name, but that's a name they came. Maybe Robert Druce did. I don't know. But yeah, so they came up with the Who. So that's when we get the official name here, the Who. Um, but Druce eventually leaves as their manager, basically, and a guy named Helmut Gordon takes over as manager of the group. Sandom, who's the drummer, is being criticized at this time, not being a good enough drummer and all this stuff, which we've seen that before, of course, with the Beatles with Pete Best, you know. So it's one of the, and that happens sometimes with bands where when the band gets better, and if one member's like the weakest member and it's not kind of pulling their part, sometimes you have to make the hard decision and, you know, fire that person if you want to get better as a band and if you really want to become like a top band anyway. So, you know, stuff like that happens. So Sandom quits the band because he keeps getting criticized that his drumming's not good enough. And so here comes the fourth and very key member of the group is Keith Moon, as they're doing auditions for a new drummer, and Keith Moon comes in. I remember seeing maybe a documentary or something where Keith Moon comes in, but he says, "I'm better than those guys," or something like that. And they're like, "Oh, okay, well, let's see." And then he went on the drums, and if you know Keith Moon, he's just amazing, so fast, just so loud, so you know, really in your face, and also just such a showman too. Of course, we'll get into that. He definitely was a great showman on the drums, the way he made faces and he moved around when he did the drumming, you know. From what I heard, Keith Moon was originally like in a drummer of a surf rock band, like a Beach Boys. He was a big fan of the Beach Boys, and he was kind of in the Beach Boys style band, which is really odd because you think the Who doesn't seem like the Beach Boys style at all. So it's interesting that the Keith Moon kind of had that background, and then came with the Who, and they, you know, of course, one of the big revolutionary rock bands that really did a lot of, you know, push the envelope on what rock music can do, and one of the great drummers at that time as well. So, but yeah, Keith Moon came in. They liked what they saw, and they added him to the group. So this is 1964, like I said. And this is why I said this is when the group really became the Who. I think when Keith Moon joined in. Again, similar to when Ringo joins the Beatles, that's when the group felt like it was definitely that was the group. You know, that's the way they're going to be. They changed managers again to a guy named Peter Meaden. So they're changing a lot of managers here, and they haven't quite, you know, gotten anything out as far as singles, and they're going around trying to, you know, get contracts and, you know, get demos out and all that. Of course, once the Beatles hit it big in America, then there's this British invasion where America wants all these British bands, and companies want to get these British bands out there because they want to, you know, strike the iron while it's hot, you know, while everybody wants to be the Beatles at that time. In fact, a funny thing is Peter actually changes their name to High Numbers for a short period. I think, I don't know how long, but I'm guessing it was very short because they went back to the Who pretty quickly. I guess High Numbers was, that name didn't stick very, very long anyways. And it seems like managers do that a lot. They try to change the name, and sometimes they do, and sometimes, you know, I think I read that before with Rush, had the same thing happen to him. Now there's two filmmakers here in England named Kit Lambert and Chris Stamp, and they want to manage a group and kind of do a documentary on rock groups in England. So they kind of were looking at different bands at the time to do this documentary about, and of course they ended up picking the Who to manage and do like a documentary, whatever, on the band. Anyways, and so at this time, I guess it's 1964 we're talking about, the band really started gaining a really big reputation, being a really hard rock band at that time. Loud, fast, heavy, you know, loud. And they were doing some crazy stuff on stage. If you know, one thing the Who is very famous for is their stage presence and kind of the destructiveness that they have on stage. And Pete Townsend did this thing where he would bash his guitar, you know, on the stage, you know, after, you know, bash it on amplifiers on the stage itself, on the drums. You know, he would, which seems crazy even today when I see that, like, oh no, that good guitar, don't destroy that good looking guitar. But he kind of, I don't know if it's done before, but he definitely was a big thing that Townsend, I think, started. I know Jimi Hendrix would do something like that too at one point. But anyway, so yeah, he was starting to destroy instruments on stage. And of course, Keith Moon, too, I think, would destroy his drum set as well. But they're starting to get this big stage presence. Of course, Townsend had the famous windmill guitar strum, which to this day, I don't know how to do it. I try to do it on my own guitar. I'm like, how do you strum it and do the windmill? Like, I don't get it. But it's awesome to watch him do it. It's so, unique to him. Keith Moon's, like I said, his playing, his style, or how he moves around the bass and how he makes faces was great. And then Daughtry would do this mic swing where he takes the mic and swing it really like a big swing and then throw it way up in the air and catch it. Really cool stuff. And I think that really helped them kind of get out there a little bit more and get more traction at this time. So a big moment in 1964, as I said, they're getting very popular at this point, is they attracted the attention of the Kinks producer, Shel Talmy. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. I'm actually reading a biography right now on the Kinks, so there's a lot of talks on him and how he managed the Kinks, and I'm still kind of towards the beginning of that book. But so it's kind of interesting to see this and go the connection between the Kinks and the Who here. Yeah, so they really, of course, Shel Talmy, somebody they really wanted to, get to produce them and to get them a contract. And so the big point is Townsend, who kind of becomes their big songwriter, which usually you think it's the lead singer in a lot of bands, but this time it was really Townsend was really the mastermind behind a lot of the great songs of the Who. And so he writes a song called I Can't Explain. This is, yes, again to 1965. Anyways, and I Can't Explain definitely has a Kinks sound to it, and that's what Townsend was going for, to try to get, this Kinks producer to kind of notice him and try to help him out. And so it's a very brilliant kind of idea and strategic. Anyways, very good song too. I really like that song. I Can't Explain. It's one of my favorite of, especially the early period of the Who. So I Can't Explain becomes actually a big hit. It becomes a top 10 song. It's their first big hit that they come out with in 1965. It does get Shel Talmy to help them get signed on with Decca Records. So it worked out. They got a hit song. They got signed on the Decca Records, and they were able to make their first album. But before this happens, actually, like I said, I mentioned before, a lot of infighting, especially with Daughtry. I remember in Townsend's book and in the documentary, they talked about this as well. But Daughtry actually gets kicked out of the band at this point for fighting a lot. From what I read, he fought with Keith Moon. I guess him and Keith Moon were button heads or something. And I guess the rest of the group decided to kick Daughtry out of the group, and he was, kicked out of the group, which is crazy because how could you have the Who without Daughtry? It seems like. So there's a very real, possibility that the Who would not have Daughtry anymore, and that Daughtry would have to, get a new lead singer, I guess. And I think that was a real possibility that was the end of Daughtry's, tenure with the band or whatnot, which is crazy to think. I don't know if they could have been as good with another singer. It seems like you need Daughtry. He's definitely his voice and his stage presence very viable to the group, and all that. So it's kind of crazy to think that he was kicked out of the band for a little bit. But then they would patch things up, and Daughtry came back into the band, and he, I think, apologized, and they kind of, probably had to make some compromises or had to, negotiate, what to do in the future. So Daughtry, or give some demands, I should say, that Daughtry has to do to not get kicked out again, So yeah, so they come back together, luckily. And this is, of course, at the point where they're starting to become a big band. I said, British Invasion's hitting, so British bands are getting very popular at this point. So they're hitting just at the right moment for the British Invasion at this point, and they have a top 10 hit as well. Well, their next single is one of the great singles of all time, and that is My Generation, another single that comes out in 1965. It reaches number 2 in the UK charts and is the highest charted single in the UK for The Who. I don't think The Who ever get number 1. Yeah, they don't get number 1 hit, which is crazy. They've had so many big hits. No number 1s, but they got number 2 with My Generation. My Generation is, again, another just brilliantly written song by Townsend. It's a great rock song. For that time period, it was really kind of a heavy rock song for 65, to be honest. And it's got probably the best bass line I've ever heard in a song, and in fact, some bass solos, which you don't hear. Bass guitar is so great, but overall, just a great rock song. Even today, I would listen to that song and go, "Man, it's such a good rock song." But again, Daltrey just kills it on the vocals, and he does the little stuttering. People try to bring us down. He gets this. I'm not doing it justice, but it's so good. And the backing vocals, and one of the greatest lines, "I hope I die before I get old." Such a brilliant line written by Townsend. It really kind of explains that, of course, called My Generation, explains that baby boomer generation at that time, the hippie, that would come the hippies, their kind of view on life, live life hard and fast and don't think about the future and stuff like that. So a great song for them. Another song that really helped them get up there as a band, one of the top bands in 1965, and it helped them come out with their first album, which is called My Generation, named after their big hit, My Generation. Their debut album reaches number 5 in the UK, so it was a top 5 hit. And again, My Generation was on, of course, huge hit for them. Also had another hit song called The Kids Are All Right, which is another really great song. So it's a really cool album with those two. Also has a really good, I think it's the last song on the album, has a really good instrumental called The Ox, which is one that Entwistle, I think, writes this instrumental, which has the bass as kind of the major instrument on it, which is kind of unique anyways. And for that point on, Entwistle is known as The Ox. And I remember seeing this before, like The Ox. I'm like, who's The Ox? Why do people keep saying The Ox? And I found out, oh, Entwistle is called The Ox. And I had no idea why until recently when I heard this album and there was a song called The Ox. I was like, oh, that's why Entwistle is called The Ox, because of this one instrumental song on the first album. I don't have this album, but it's a really good debut album, I think. There's some cover songs, I believe, on it. And like I said, 2 really good songs on it. My Generation, The Kids Are All Right. But overall, just a really solid, debut albums. It's hard to come up with a great debut album sometimes. A lot of times, especially these British bands, even the Beatles did this. I mean, they did a lot of cover songs. They did a couple of their own stuff that became hits. But like Rolling Stones' first album was all like covers, and it was not a very good album. So at this time, to come out with a decent album is a big deal, I think. And so that definitely was a good first step for the Who, I think. Like I said, and it was top 5 hit and all that. Well, in 1966, they come out with their second album, which I have here. I have to cover this part. I have 2 albums on one, but we have a quick one. Is their second album that comes out, 1966. It goes number 4 in the UK, so it actually does it one better than My Generation. There was really no hits on this album, though, quick one. And to me, it's one of the weakest albums, unfortunately. Boris the Spider is kind of a unique song that Entwistle sings that you might see on a Greatest Hits album, which I've seen it on a Greatest Hits album. And it kind of goes into them starting to do some experimental stuff, which you'll see more later on. But yeah, not one of their most memorable albums, to be honest. Not one that you can hear a lot about. But they had some other hit singles that weren't on the album at this time, which were A Magic Bus, Substitute, and Pictures of Lily. All 3 pretty solid singles. That'd be, again, all on Greatest Hits albums like that, which is crazy. I wish they put those songs on the quick one. It would have made this actually a pretty good album, but that happens a lot with these UK albums. They don't put on their best stuff always. They keep the singles out, which is very unfortunate. So at this time, the Who, they perform at the Monterey Pop Festival, and this really gets them noticed in the U.S. I guess they haven't really hit big in the U.S. at this point in '66, mostly big in the U.K., even though there's this British invasion. I'm sure some of those songs were hit songs in the radio, but it seems like they hadn't really hit it until this point at the Monterey Pop Festival, which they have a lot of great performances, like at the Monterey Pop Festival. The Isle of Wight, I think, is one. They're really known for those, like I said, performances, I think, which really helps them. Which I think is interesting is they had this very successful U.S. tour at that point after the Monterey Pop Festival in 1966 that really got them on the map in the U.S. and they were touring with the Hermits, which is like, how can you have two completely different bands? The Who and the Hermits seem like completely different styles, but I like both bands for different reasons. Obviously, you got the kind of the more hard rock with the Who, and you got more bubblegum pop with the Hermits. Anyways, but it's interesting. I would love to see a concert with those two bands playing back to back. That would be pretty awesome. Their next single is another big. They have another big hit with "I Can See for Miles," which is another one of my favorite songs of theirs, to be honest. And it reached number 10 UK, 9 US. So it's a top 10 hit in both the UK and US. So it's kind of the first top 10 hit in the US that they had. And it's definitely a standard that you hear all the time from the Who, and it was on the radio a lot. In fact, it's the best-selling single in the U.S. is "I Can See for Miles," interesting enough. In 1967, we get another great moment with the Who when they perform on the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour. And if you know this story, it's definitely a wild one, and definitely one you see a lot when you talk about the Who. And you look on YouTube. You have to look on YouTube. It's such a crazy thing to see. But Smothers Brothers, of course, had this comedy show, which one of them died recently, I think, one of the Smothers Brothers. But they did some music too. They were into music, and they brought a lot of good musical guests on and did comedy skits as well. And so they brought the Who on, and they did, I don't know if they did more than one song, but the big song they did was "My Generation." It's a really good performance of "My Generation" that they do live on the show. And at the end, of course, Pete Townshend's going to, bash his guitar on the ground. They were going to do like and Moon's going to probably kick over his drums and all this stuff, the usual, stage performance that they do, destroying their set, and I think that's what they're meant to do and that's what the Smothers Brothers wanted to do. And it's kind of part of the, whole thing. But what they didn't know is that Keith Moon was going to put, I'm not sure what he put, he put some kind of explosion in his I think bass drum or something like that, and very could have been very disastrous, not very good choices that Keith Moon was making, as we'll see later on. Keith Moon was not a guy that was known for his good choices, but yeah, he puts an explosion into his bass drum, whatever, and they're at the end there, and Townsend's starting to destroy his guitar, and they're winding down the song. And all of a sudden, this big explosion, boom! And luckily, no one was in front, I guess. Or, I mean, gosh, who knows what could happen? He could have killed somebody. But, because I don't think Daltrey or Townsend knew that was happening. And boom! And the smoke everywhere. And you see Townsend just walking in a daze, like, oh my God, like, what just happened? And it was so crazy, like that. Keith Moon did something like that. And it's funny because one of the Smothers Brothers comes on stage and he has an acoustic guitar, and this was all staged that Townsend was supposed to take it and hit the guitar and break his acoustic guitar. But of course, he was just in a daze, but he still grabbed it, and and you can tell that, and of course, later on, Townsend would have some hearing loss, and he says it wasn't because of that, but early on, it was rumored that it was because of that explosion that caused some hearing loss on Townsend, though Townsend said it was because he was staying next to a speaker when Daltrey screamed or something like that, and that really caused his hearing loss. Who knows? But it could not have been good. It was not a good idea. Really could have hurt someone bad, but it's just one of those crazy Keith Moon stories as they have, and crazy Who story there. But anyways, that was a big moment for them, I think, in music history, I would say. I'm going to end this video talking about their third album, because I'm running out of time for this, and this will be part 1. So I have to do a part 2 on deep dive on the Who, but there's so much information to say here, and I'm just now getting into the early part of their career. But the third album, 1967, a very interesting one, and I'm gonna cover it, and it's called "The Who Sell Out." What you see, there's Daltrey and Baked Beans, and Townsend and Deodorant, and here's the back part. It's also pretty funny with Entwistle and Keith Moon pretending to sell products. Anyways, the Who Sell Out reaches number 13 in the UK, and they have their hit song "I Can See for Miles" on the album, which is my favorite song on the album, in fact. But yeah, it's a very interesting album. I know Nick from Townsend 505, this is his favorite album of all time, and he's a huge Who fan, so it's his favorite Who album as well. and he talks about it all the time. We've reviewed on I think SoundLab Studios channel. Talked about it so many times, and it is a very fun album. Yeah, definitely a very good album. Definitely kind of starts seeing them experiment more and concept ideas, and this definitely has a concept to it, which is that they pretend like this is songs that are coming on the radio, and so they have these fake commercials that they do themselves in between some of the songs, which is very fun. At first, when I first heard this album, I was like, "What is this? This doesn't make any sense." I wasn't a fan, but then the more I listened to it, the more I was like, "Oh, okay, I kind of get what they're going for here." They're making it sound like you're listening to the radio, and these commercials are coming on between songs. It's a very interesting idea, a very fun idea that I like a lot. And like I said, it only has really one hit song, but for the most part, a lot of the songs are actually quite good, quite catchy, nice rock, catchy songs, I would say. And even like the last song, Rael 1 and 2, definitely is starting to point towards the next album, Tommy, and starting to experiment more with instrumental stuff and do something different there. But overall, a very good album with kind of an interesting concept. So definitely, if you haven't listened to it, you gotta listen to The Who Sell Out. It's a very fun album, very interesting. Anyway, so I'm gonna stop it there. Next time we'll start with their next big album, Tommy, and their kind of their peak period, I think, of The Who. We'll talk about next anyway. So besides that, feel free to comment what do you think about The Who and what are some of your favorite albums or songs. Love to read your comments. Appreciate it. And just thank you to anybody watching this video. Thank you to anybody liking it. And thank you to all my subscribers for supporting the channel. Appreciate it all. Love you guys.